we go.
Okay, everybody, I think we will start. What I've been slightly hanging around for are the people who, in fact, are only about 50 metres, 50 yards in old money away, because they're always the last to appear. Those of you that have had to travel, you've been here for a while, and it's lovely to see so many people here. I personally love inaugural lectures because they're a lecture like no other. You don't have your segmented audience, perhaps your science category or whatever your area. You have to talk across the patch, and I can't think of anybody better to do that than Jonathan. So it was going to be the second of this academic year's inaugural lectures, but in fact it is the first because we were blown away by a funeral with the first one. But as I say, wonderful to have you here, Jonathan. And we're going to have Jonathan's lecture. Then you're able to come through, all of you, I hope, for a drink just next door. The other point about inaugural lectures is if you want to ask any difficult questions or indeed any easy questions, you'll have to do so over a drink because we don't have Q&A at the end of inaugural lectures, but we will have Mike, who's going to give a vote of thanks at the end. So Professor Sharp, thank you very much. So I hope you all know the reason that we're here is because a very important title has been bestowed. And it is wonderful, that moment when years and years of hard work is recognised and you become a professor. I have to say that Jonathan is a bit of a long timer at St George's. He came here, as we'll probably no doubt hear in more detail, in 1994. And initially did his training in paediatric intensive care. He was made a senior lecturer in 2002. I arrived at the university. I'm Jenny Hine, the Vice-Chancellor, in case it hasn't come up on the, I won't tell you who that is, that I am Jenny Hine, Vice-Chancellor. And Jonathan was one of the first people I got to know. He was really lovely, open, really informative, told me a lot about the relationship between the trust and the university. And he definitely made me feel very welcome here. So I'd like to give you a personal vote of thanks for that. What he's going to talk about are the ingredients, the recipe to make a doctor. That is a very complex thing, and he'll probably, I don't know what he's going to say, but certainly I would reflect how much education and training has changed since the days that we were compelled, given rote learning and the method by which we morphed into doctors. So please do come forward. It's lovely to see friends and family who I'm sure may never have seen you in this context. Over to you.
Jenny, thank you so much. That's really, really kind of you. What a beautiful introduction as well. Our friends and family have also probably rarely seen me actually in a suit and tie. Very few of you probably have as well. Thank you very much for coming. It's a total honour to do this, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to do this, an amazing privilege to be able to stand in front of my friends, my family and colleagues and past colleagues and some students that I've been working with as well. Thank you so much for all of that. Thank you for those who've come from really not very far away and those who've come from very far away. I think the furthest away I've discovered was Wales, perhaps, maybe Liverpool's further than Wales, I don't know, maybe further. And there's also plenty of people online. Hello out there online. Apparently I'm very small in the corner of a little box next to this large screen here, and I've also been told to stand fairly still and not to get too excited at any stage. Now, I also want to say, actually, just in front of you, how I'm going to be talking about quite a lot of different places I've been in my career and some achievements. Perhaps you think, oh, they're quite good, or might think otherwise, I don't know. But I think the most important thing to note is really my achievements actually built on the contributions of others. Not only the people that have come before me, but people that I've journeyed with, friends, family. And I particularly like to thank my family, who are all sitting in the front row there. Told them to sit there, so nobody else did. And also my friends who've given me all my good ideas, my colleagues, people who've mentored me, and you'll be hearing more about those as we've go forward. And also like to thank this institution. As Jenny said, I've been working here sort of on and off since about 1994, but mostly since 2002. And this institution's given me an amazing space to develop and grow, not only as a clinician, but also as an educator. And thank you so much for that, and for your forebears as well, Jenny, for their contribution. Now, I chose this title because this kind of is what I do. You know, I'm going to make doctors, but of course, just as part of a very large team. But I thought it'd be quite a nice title to try and capture everything there. Let's see how we do with that. Some people that are particularly missing, actually, are my parents. It's my mum, Patricia, violin player, fiddle player, and continuing to play quartets right into her late 80s. And my dad, who was an advertiser, who liked nothing more than to give a really complicated pitch for some new product in front of a hostile set of clients. So I'll be thinking of him, perhaps while I'm doing this session here. Now, my career journey is a little bit like this. This is particularly in reference to a couple of people who may understand some of the Strava maps up here. Now, you'd have thought, really, if you're trying to get to point B, really what you want to do is go on a nice straight route, perhaps avoid unnecessary climbing, and perhaps go alone, you know. And that's my trip to see my daughter, who lives up in Sheffield, that I took over the summer. But actually, my career is much more like this journey, which I undertook with a friend of mine sitting over there, Mark. It's a bit higgledy-piggledy. You go kind of around the houses a bit. It's mostly based on interest rather than a specific objective. Although, as you can see, it's kind of circling around a single objective. And what is that objective, I kind of wondered? Well, I think overall, I've come to realise it's actually getting better care for children. And actually doing that needs a whole load of different things: resources, facilities, but also better trained staff, and more of them. And that's really where my career has been going. And that's kind of the bit that I've been circling around on that. Now, before we get to that, you might have heard of this kind of title, Professor of Practice. Is that a new one to you? Maybe, I don't know, getting some blank faces. One or two, it's new. Now, I'll just try to explain that a little bit as well. So professor, you're probably fairly familiar with. So basically what a professor does is they try and find that new knowledge. Okay, so something nobody knows about, then they know a little bit more about it, and then they document it. Okay, there's quite a few professors in here. Perhaps you can agree with that? Not some of them, yeah, okay. Now, professor of practice is slightly different. The primary objective of a professor of practice is not to create new knowledge, but to understand how to use it and show other people how to use it as well. And so I liken that to a surveyor who goes in and makes a map. That's a professor, okay? He doesn't necessarily show people how to use the map or walk through somewhere with you. But a professor of practice, that's what they do. And that's me showing my family how to navigate around the French Alps somewhere. And that's what a professor of practice does. And obviously, I'm not doing it in geography, I'm doing it in clinical education. So I think that's really roughly what a professor of practice sort of does. Now, making a doctor is fairly straightforward, and so hopefully those of you who are trying to find out how to make a doctor and can now go off to the bar or wherever you want to, you can leave after this slide, because here we go, everything's in here. So what you need is some basic facts, okay, and then you maybe learn some kind of clinical skills there from some sort of expert type person who seems to be shouting at her students, and then you try and put it into practice with some poor lady there. And then, of course, you need to memorize it all, okay, which definitely needs a lot of caffeine along there. Then, because it's like a regulated profession, you then need to sit an exam at the end and, hey, presto, you know, you've made it, haven't you? Is it really that easy? Well, you probably realise the answer is not going to be yes. The ingredients of a doctor, I think I'll put down here, you know, so much sulfur, so much sodium and all those sorts of things. But if you add all of those up together, they're really not going to make a very good doctor. And there's lots of other things that actually have to go in to what a doctor is. And I put a few of those at the top, and they're quite difficult things to work out how you get into someone. Probably not the sort of thing that's going to come out of a lecture or even a really good clinical skills tutorial. Very complicated things. But you'll know the difference when someone's got those things and when they haven't got those things. Because each one of you would have been to see a GP. You think, oh, that wasn't very good. You know, they didn't really listen to me, or they're rather hasty, or they were straight onto the computer, or they didn't really want to know more about this, those sorts of things. Or you might say, they really got what I was after, and I was straight out the door with that. No time. That's my kind of doctor. I just want to be straight out the door as fast as possible. But that may not be what you want. Even in one doctor's practice, you'll know who to go to once you know the practice for any particular thing. And that's because doctors are not the same. And it's these skills at the top that differentiate them one from another. So how do they get made? Well, or more specifically, how did I get made? So, well, not literally. We're going to start at the top. We're going to start at the top here. This is me as just first year medical school. David and Rob, you probably remember me with long hair. And this was me trying to learn how to row, not very successfully, as you see, doing a bit of partying. And this is finally as a graduate student, okay? So, or a graduate. I just finished there and looking very happy with myself at 24. And then, you know, how did I then go from there to where I am now, kind of middle-aged, pediatric intensive care consultant, bit of medical education going on, run a few things. By the way, before we go any further, I think some full disclosure is needed, okay? This is a photograph I submitted to the medical school for publicity. It was a happy day, I think it was Father's Day, and there I was, happily in Cornwall, because there's something else associated with it as well. I should probably also be a bit fuller in my disclosure about, you know, how I came to be my family. So this is me down the bottom here, the Round family, good name, family of Birmingham engineers. We've got two kind of luminaries in the family. Dorothy Round, you may have heard of, celebrated tennis player and won Wimbledon a couple of times. Captain Henry Round, you've probably never heard of. But if you turn on your phone, you should be thanking him. He invented the LED. Okay, not bad. The other side, no doctors there. The other side is slightly different. These are the doctors on the other side. Okay, so it looks more like a kind of autosomal dominant condition, only affecting the men. Although not quite. Okay, there's a very interesting person here. That's my granny. Okay, my granny. And she was the first, she was an amazing pioneer, 2 seconds about her really. She was one of the very first female doctors in this country. She went to Newnham College, Cambridge. They wouldn't give her a degree, because how would you give a degree to, you know, a woman? You can't. In fact, they didn't start giving degrees out until the 40s. So she had a sort of equivalent medical degree, went to UCL. She couldn't train with the men because she was female. She couldn't join the mess because the mess, which was where you lived, didn't have any women's rooms because it was, how would you have a woman doctor? Anyway, that was her. And as you see, it's carried on through the male line. I'm also not even the first professor in the family. We've got 2 others already. So this is kind of where we've been going. Now, let's go back to the beginning. So I started my educational career here, St Paul's School. I look back at some school reports described as restless, distractible, issues with concentration. Something went right, and I ended up at Jesus College, Oxford, and there I met my wonderful best man, David, wherever you are, somewhere at the back. There we go. And Rob Bevan, also sitting next to him as well. 2 wonderful friends that I made there. Now, I learned many things. I grew up quite a lot. I met my future wife, Jane, who's sitting there. But from an academic point of view, this was an amazing period of growth. And I think this is really where I learned how to think. Because one thing they really teach you here is training in thinking. To think broadly, to think freely, holding many ideas at the same time, really without coming to any conclusion. And that kind of approach has been an incredibly important one throughout my career, that I've been able to do that. Anyway, armed with that, then on to King's College Hospital. And King's College Hospital in their lecture theatre, this is their lecture theatre at King's College. And this is a sort of old school lecture theatre. It's like this, but much less friendly there. The basic problem is once you got in, okay, there was no escape. You couldn't get out other than going past the lecturer down here. And so once you were in, you were properly in. And it was there one afternoon, I had my first educational revelation. And probably all of my career as a medical educationalist or clinical educationalist comes from this moment. And there I was, it was a pathology lecture, late one afternoon. It was hot probably, I don't know, I'm making it up now, but she was showing me some slides, handwritten acetates, and she came out with this wonderful line. You don't really need to read this, it's all in the handout. Okay, you don't really need to read this, it's all in the handout. What on earth was going on? Why was she wasting everybody's time and it was in the handout? Is this the best way to teach? Could there be a different way to teach? And for the first time, I kind of thought, well, actually, you could probably do it a whole load of different ways. And really, I traced my career as an educationist back to that moment, thinking, well, actually, there are probably better ways to do it. There's almost always going to be better ways to do it. Certainly there were than that afternoon. And when I come to think about how to make a doctor, actually, this is incredibly important, actually, how you deliver the material. So, what I thought would probably be a good idea was to have a tiny bit about what actually medical education is. So we're going to have a very, 2 or 3 slides just on this, okay? Just in case you're wavering. So Hippocrates, father of medicine, his big claim was he said, actually, it's not supernatural spirits and demons that are making you sick. Perhaps there's real physical reasons. He came up with this idea, very revelatory. He also came up with inspection, palpation, auscultation, and the other one. He also came up with the idea that using your senses and your intellect, combined with some kind of revelation or intuition, you might get to the right answer. So if you think about it, how far have we really moved on from that? A lot more science, perhaps, but we're kind of still roughly there. The way he taught was very Greek at the time, so basically you sat around and listened to your elders, and you'd learned stuff from them, and then you repeated your kind of stuff to your own disciples, and you basically did what the boss told you to do, and that was an apprenticeship. And pretty much we got frozen in that kind of medical education model all the way until the beginning of the 20th century, when William Osler came along. And William Osler did something different. Now, William Osler, of course, great luminary in medical education, set up the American Association of Pediatrics, Johns Hopkins, if this means anything to you, came up with a few other ideas, a journal club. Have you ever been to a journal club? Blame William Osler, he's the fault there. But his main idea was to stop medical education just happening in a lecture theatre like this or in a library and actually bring it onto the wards. And these were his great slogans. Listen to your patient. He is telling you the diagnosis. Obviously no female patients there. And also this is what he wanted on his gravestone. He brought medical students into the wards for bedside teaching. And that's pretty much where King's had got to in terms of its ideas about how to teach medicine as well. Anyway, I better take you through a bit more career because that's what I meant to do at an inaugural. So I graduated and went to Joyce Green Hospital. Joyce Green Hospital, probably no one will remember that except perhaps Shaq at the back there. You do remember that. It's now some affordable housing. I then went on to King's and also to Dulwich Hospital. Dulwich is now a school, by the way, so we're getting quite a track record of causing hospitals to shut down. Onto the Brook Hospital, which is the next one, and the Brook is also now affordable housing as well. But the Brook was the place of my second major revelation and in career-wise. And I can trace my journey as a paediatrician back to there, and also my interest in medical error. Now, I better tell you a tiny bit more about this because I was working as the casualty officer. People nowadays would call you an F3, if that means anything to people. And so I was doing the casualty stuff. No training at all. Okay, and this says, here's your bleep, off you go. And almost no supervision. So you could call people up, but it was very, very poorly set up in that way. I think it was worse than most other places at the time, but it was kind of probably not that unusual. A patient came in, 9-monther, with persistent vomiting. This patient had been to a couple of other hospitals before, and I diagnosed viral gastroenteritis, and we set the child a fluid challenge. Could they tolerate diurolite? And if so, it was probably okay, we could turf them out. And I handed over this patient to my colleague who was on the next shift, who felt that probably the patient was okay and could go home. This patient was then taken back into another hospital about 6 hours later and went on to die from intussusception, which is a treatable surgical condition, okay? So effectively, I'd missed a condition that actually led to this child's death. The reasons, of course, behind this are quite broad. Broadly, the lack of training that I'd had, and also the lack of supervision that I'd had were the key things that sat in there. But the thing that really shook me, and I was quite scared of children at that time, but in a kind of way that I've often done throughout my career and actually throughout my life, is when something really frightens me, I tend to not run away from it, but kind of think, that'd be quite interesting. I wonder if I can learn a bit more about that and try and overcome that. And so I thought, well, children can't be lying. They're not trying to lie, are they? There must be things I just can't see. And so I began to get more and more interested in how children were and how they behaved and how they behaved when they were sick. And from that, actually, I began to really love assessing children. And rather than kind of leafing through the box of new patients coming in and selecting those that weren't children, I'd be picking out the really young ones to see if I could learn more about them and talk to the paediatricians. So I think I traced my love of paediatrics right back to that, because the next thing I did was go on to Farnborough Hospital, and many wonderful people there. I think Sue Hobbins might be online. Hi, Sue. Andrew Long was also there looking after me, and also Menica De Silva, who is also online. Hi, Menica. And Menica was looking after me as the registrar at Farnborough Hospital, also now, by the way, knocked down. This is now another hospital, I should say. They're not all turned into affordable housing. So this was my first paediatric job, and I realised this was the career for me. Amazing place. Thank you, guys, for that. And then finally on to UCL. They couldn't knock down. It's grade 1 listed. It's now a research institute. And it was there that I met Professor David Waters, who was only just Dr. David Waters there, as one of the paediatric consultants. And then when he came to St George's, somewhat later, I followed him as a clinical lecturer after that. And so it was there at St George's I started work as the clinical lecturer. Now, the clinical lecturer mixes clinical work. We were also doing some fetal lung physiology as well, and also teaching. So a nice varied job. I really enjoyed the varied job. And there, under the guidance of Davith and the now departed Phil Lee, who was the other clinical lecturer, I learnt the rudiments, the basics of medical education. What I'd worked out quite quickly was that lectures didn't really stick. Okay, it covered a lot of material, but you really didn't remember much of it. And actually, it was not a lot of use when you then actually had to apply this to actual patients. So what I was doing at this stage, this is a kind of stop motion type thing of a seminar I was doing at the time with some students. And this is a case-based tutorial. It's one of the first I must have done. And basically, we're putting together a patient story. We're going through that. We're bringing in physiology here, getting some drawings, some different presentations, how drugs work, a whole loads of different things, all fitted into this patient seminar. These were great fun to do, and they really worked very well with the students as well. So it was great fun. I was also realising at the time I probably ought to do some research, and we did indeed produce some research as well. Papers here. I meant to produce some papers, by the way, at an inaugural lecture, and there's a few here. But also, it seemed to be much more interested in the Christmas BMJ, like this amazing paper here. I think Nigel's somewhere in the group behind Nigel. This great piece of work we did there. It's amazing what you can do with 1.5 hours and actually get something published, and other things that we did as well. Now, the 90s were actually quite a rapid time in the development of medical education. And having really not done much since William Osler's new ideas, things were really moving quite far forward quite quickly, really drawing on the ideas of adult learning theory that had really been popularised in the 60s. Could we begin to use these much more in medical education? And people were exploring this. And one place that really was exploring this was St George's. Now, up to then, we had to sort of cover the curriculum. Coverage of the curriculum was a kind of buzzword, which basically meant taking vast amounts of information and then chopping it up into hour-long segments. We call them lectures, and then expecting people to remember this and find use for them when you actually got to a patient. So this was quite a different way of doing things. And in essence, really what you try and do is you have some clinical experiences, which is meant to lead to some curiosity, and then you might learn from that. That's the basic idea of that. And at the time, St George's, what they were trying to do was introduce problem-based learning into their curriculum, and they were working out how to do this. It took a few years before they actually were fully able to do it. But this is their basic idea behind that. And I could see that it was pretty much the same as the kind of case-based approach that I've been using, although mine was kind of a bit more off the cuff and informal than the way that was being proposed there. So I was thinking, oh, this is quite interesting. You know, my interest fitting very much alongside which was the direction of travel of medical education generally. Anyway, I was a trainee, and trainees, what if they do nothing else, they have to move, and off I went. So by this time, I'd worked out I probably wanted to train in paediatric intensive care, and there wasn't really any paediatric intensive care in this country at that stage. And at that stage, we all had to go abroad. I went off to Australia. And that's me doing it's retrieval medicine, or better known as the Flying Doctor, is the kind of slogan there. And then to Westmead Children's Hospital, which is also in Sydney, where I spent a while doing some intensive care there as well. And then on to Gravesend Hospital, where I met the amazing Tanoj, who's here. Thank you so much for coming. We worked together there. That's also, I'm afraid to say, Tanoj, you'll be delighted to know it's also been knocked down. I'm not sure what's gone up in its place, probably some shopping mall or something like that. And then finally, we went on to Guy's, where I finished my training as a paediatric intensivist and in cardiology as well. And then after that, I took up my consultant job, or senior lecturer job, here at St George's, and it's where I've been ever since. There's one other photo there, we'll come on to that in a little bit of time. Now, quite a lot have been actually happening at St George's in the meantime. Particularly, they were just starting up a new course, and this was the graduate medicine course, and with great luminaries like, just a moment. Didn't help at all. Great luminaries like Robert Boyd and Shellerbeg, but also Professor Peter McCrory, who I also believe is there somewhere in Cyprus. Hello, hope you're enjoying the sunshine. We're trying to set up a graduate medical course. In fact, they'd set one up, and this was all based around these ideas of problem-based learning. In fact, that course is essentially still going in pretty much the same format now. And many of you actually in the audience have been through that or are still on it, perhaps. What they needed was someone to run the paediatric block of that. And so they hired me. And the basic idea behind that was that actually you can't just expect these kind of clinical experiences and things to work if you've actually got a fixed endpoint, which is a doctor who actually knows what they're doing. So what you have to do is curate those clinical experiences, give them some actual tutorials, and actually the correct resources, so they actually kind of, their curiosity goes in the correct direction. Davith, I hope that's not completely bastardized the course. Isa gives me a thumbs up. Thank you very much indeed. Now, due to the vagaries of human resources, it was just a month from me starting before my first students arrived. And anyone who's tried to set up a course knows that's totally impossible to get a course together in a month, especially over Christmas. And so I thought, well, how am I going to do this? I kind of know what I'm going to do, but I just can't get everything printed and done in time. So I'll do it all online. So I created my first website. This is my first website here. And this is the website for the Department of Pediatrics, drop-down menus, HTML. I was very pleased with myself after that. And it was very innovative. So I was an early adopter of paperless in there. Now, one of the things that came out of this was this idea of forwards medicine. Now, I'll talk a tiny bit about this because it comes in a couple of other examples that I'm going to be talking about. Normally, we've traditionally learned what I call backwards medicine. Okay, so you learn about, say, pneumonia and pneumothorax and aspiration and asthma. And then you see a patient who has difficulty breathing and you have to think, well, I've got this library of information. How do I apply it to the patient? So you're kind of going backwards. Forwards medicine is the other way around, where you start off with a patient problem, and then you can kind of tease apart the different way they present and the different way they might examine. And from that, you learn more about these different topics, and you kind of cover the same information, but it kind of goes the right way, forwards. So from that, we actually wrote a very nice book with a couple of medical students there who helped me do that. This is won an award, it's good. And also spawned an entire series as well, the Clinical Cases Uncovered. Many of you will probably have used this series. This actually covered the entire paediatric curriculum in about 28 chapters, each one with a child presenting with something different. And then you learn about all of those different areas from that. The other area that went into forwards medicine was the virtual patient. And seeing as I spent really quite a lot of time working with virtual patients, I'll explain a tiny bit more, okay? Now, virtual patients are kind of like what they sound like. They're not actual patients at all, but they're a written representation of them. And this is, I think, the very first one that I ever wrote whilst dreaming in a seminar in Barcelona. That's another story. Anyway, so if you just quickly have a look through this, you've got some time at the top, then you've got some kind of context, who you are, then what happens, and then there's some kind of clinical information here. And then most crucially, you've got something you need to do. Okay, what would you do next? Okay, so you've got some different options. Now, the exciting thing about a virtual patient is depending on which one of these you choose, okay, you get a different reality following that. And so let's see. So this patient sounds sort of moderately ill, little baby, could be dodgy. I think we ought to see that. Okay, let's select come to see in surgery in the morning as a bad option. There we go. Let's see what happens. So it's the following morning. That's good. Oh dear. Okay, this doesn't look good. Okay, that was a bad choice. But look, so we've got some of the kind of. So you've got some other options we could do that. Return to your post, I think. That's not the one you choose at that stage. But no one died. Perhaps you've learned something just from that. Be careful. But nobody died from that, so you could play it again. Perhaps you could choose the right one the next time, or you could think a bit more carefully about it. And this was a virtual patient, and so quite a lot's happened out of these virtual patients as a result. The problem with these were an absolute pig to write. I mean, I was quite good at writing. They are awful to write, really, really difficult. But really, the only reason I realised that you could write it, I tried to teach it to some other people as well. You needed to know quite a lot clinically to make it work, but you also needed that really different thinking. And I kind of traced that back to my Oxford roots, actually, holding all these multiple different realities. Quite a few doctors just couldn't write one of these because they couldn't imagine doing something so stupid. What would happen then? Well, actually, you can think that sort of thing. Now, perhaps these would have just stayed as kind of a niche thing, but I was walking by a canal one evening in Amsterdam, and I met this wonderful crew, and many of them are just sitting over there now, and a few others as well. I'll just name check a few. There's Luke there. We've got Tripti. We've got Sheetal. We've got Aurora. We're missing Chara and Emily as well, who are part of that crew as well. Amazing people. This is the e-learning unit, and they'd hailed me, and we sat and we realised we had something in common. I had a tool I couldn't work out what to do with it. They had an e-learning unit and were very keen to use like electronic teaching aids, and this might be one of them. And they really knew how to make projects run, and they did. And so we've worked together, 10, 15 years or something? Jolly long time. Too long. Okay, they're still nodding. So quite a few different things. These are just a few of the grants that came through relating to these virtual patients. Some of these are grants that accumulate them and make repositories of them. Some are grants that help other universities write them and introduce them into their curriculum. They're all kind of pan-European ones. And I probably should name check very specifically Terry Poulton, their inspirational leader, who has mentored me quite a bit throughout this whole period, as someone who's been absolutely instrumental in finding these grants and working out how to form these partnerships and groups across the continent and beyond as well. The very last one we're still working out what to do with. This is using virtual patients to teach medical error, and it's been some very exciting projects, but we haven't quite worked out how to write it up yet. The second one down is called G4, and this involved putting virtual patients, which you can see on the screen there, right into our very own curriculum here at St George's. And if you're a TES student, you will have been using virtual patients, fairly simple ones, in your PBL sessions. So they came right there. And also they were very important in actually trying to assess and work out what virtual patients could and couldn't do. So rather than read through a whole load of papers, I'll briefly tell you can use them in assessment. It's quite difficult to get people to write them, but you can train them in it, sort of. It's much better than paper-based stuff. Motivation, people love choices. They're very motivated by them indeed. Cultural repurposing, we could take German ones and turn them into English ones, but we might as well write the English one, it took less time. Medical error, it's very effective at teaching just the medical error that is there. And also Second Life, I don't know if anyone's aware of Second Life. It's sort of, you walk around in avatars and things. It was totally useless doing virtual patients in Second Life. Probably we reckon because everyone was trying to get their hairstyle just right on their avatar. So kind of recap, we've only, I'm afraid, we're running out of time, aren't we? You definitely can't get people to delay the drink session, can we? That's terrible. We'll move a bit faster, shall we? Let's do that. So in 2007, I'd kind of built quite a decent course, getting great feedback, but I didn't really feel I'd really made much impact in making bulk better paediatricians and actually training them all that much better. And there was a real problem. Here at St George's, our assessment strategy was all wrong. Now, to briefly get into this is how I got into assessment. So basically, this is how it works, isn't it? You learn stuff, and then people examine you on it. Yeah? No. What happens if you've got a high stakes or very busy course is people work out what's in the assessment and just learn that. That's reality. Okay? I wish it wasn't, but it is. And what we worked out, fairly obvious, was due to lots of compensations in our assessment strategy here, actually there were whole chunks you didn't really need to learn, particularly weighty bits, which had not that much kind of value in there. O&G, sorry, wasn't. Psychiatry, definitely, there's not that much to learn in that. It's great. Peds, definitely no. So there were lots of areas where it wasn't such a good idea to spend your time, and Pediatrics was one of them. So I took over as the knowledge, chief examiner for knowledge, and under the amazing Kathy Bersico, we put together a new assessment strategy, trying to make this much more even across there. And now you actually have to learn pretty much everything that's important in there. At this stage, we saw around 2% of our graduates going into paediatrics from the course here at St George's. National average, 3 to 4%. So we weren't really doing very well. And I thought we could do a lot better. Part of it, I thought, was people just weren't learning it, so they wouldn't really want to choose a job in there. The other part of it was low visibility. So I put an advert out to some people like, would you like to join a paediatric society? Start setting it up, a student paediatric society, PEDSOC. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. Lots of people came forward. Ben Ford, I think Ben Ford might be online. He was our first president. Hannah is with us tonight, also involved in that very first committee. And the PEDSOC's still going strong. I don't know, there's some people here tonight from the PEDSOC. But they've been very important at putting a whole programs together of lectures, careers things, OSCE practice, and others to help people raise the visibility of paediatrics in this institution. We now have around 5% of our graduates end up as paediatricians. So something moved. I don't think it's just me. That's it. Incidentally, what they're presenting here is some really important work looking at oncology in paediatric intensive care. So children with cancer, should they go to paediatric intensive care or not? Now, you'd obviously hopefully think, of course, particularly my ICU crew up there. But back in these days, okay, just around 2010, people thought, well, probably it was futile. In fact, we were able to show that wasn't the case, and it was some of their work that was particularly important in there. Now, at this stage, I was kind of thinking, well, should I do anything else as well? And my mentor and colleague, Mike Sharland, who you'll be hearing from shortly, suggested I take on the role of care group lead. Okay, he claimed that I might have aptitude for it, but I think there might have been no one else. This was a very difficult job indeed, as I found out. In fact, I went into it really not seeing any kind of connection between medical management and clinical education. I turned out to be completely wrong. And in fact, the two are so intertwined. And the next bit of this session just is about how the two link together. Now, in common with pretty much, I'd better tell you what a care group is to start off with if you're not from health. In fact, even if you're from health, you probably don't know what a care group is. I'm still trying to learn myself. So a care group is a division within the hospital, okay? Pediatrics, 24 million turnover, about 250 staff, 75 beds, and some impressive waiting lists. Financial problems, and also kind of missing staff. You know, there was lots of staff absences, lots of reliance on locums and bank and agency. And if you add all of these things together, you end up with a fairly big safety problem. And we had a very big safety problem. Now, we were declaring what we call a serious incident roughly every 3 months in paediatrics. Now, you might not know what a serious incident is, but a serious incident is where something goes badly wrong, okay? Someone ends up with life-changing injuries or incidents or something, or dies. And we think they probably shouldn't have. And that's what a serious incident is around. We were getting one of these every 3 months. And just to kind of ram that one home, that means a child's died, okay, that probably shouldn't have done. Every 3 months. It was now my job to try and sort this out. The problem was there were all these conflicting priorities that were coming together. What could I do? I didn't have any more money. So I only knew one thing, which was education. So I thought, well, maybe we could have an education plan to try and sort this out. And actually, my reasoning goes as follows. It's kind of fairly logical. If you train the juniors better, the trainees, okay, they're the ones that are kind of doing lots of the frontline stuff. They'll be better, okay? They'll also improve their morale, okay? If you improve their morale, other people might want to come and join them. Recruitment will be easier, less locums, the bills will go down. It's all good. Well, somewhat surprisingly, we did some other things as well, but somewhat surprisingly, actually it worked. And those SIs, once every 3 months, okay, we didn't have another one for 4 years on our wards, okay? Pretty impressive. The other thing that we brought on that, and one of the key things that perhaps we thought did that, were these things that it came to be known as tricky pediatrics. And tricky pediatrics is essentially case-based learning for patients that go wrong, okay? Things that are really difficult. Sophie, who's sitting over there, and my long-term friend and collaborator came up with this title here. I quite like tricky pediatrics. And tricky pediatrics essentially is case-based learning from my own skeleton closet of things that I've done wrong or other people have had difficulty managing the patient. We talk through it, work out where it goes wrong and why. But these are very memorable. Now, I've got a pyramid here because I like pyramids, but it also tells you about the kind of level of response here. So reaction, everybody likes this. We'll probably give this a sort of 4 out of 5, maybe 3.5 out of 5, because you just liked being here. But, you know, did you learn anything? Did it change your behaviour? And particularly, did it change the results in what you were trying to do in terms of teaching, in terms of treating children? And these were some of the comments that we got. This survey was done about 4 years after the trainees had actually been involved in tricky paediatrics. It was still doing stuff, remembering actual phrases from the tricky ped sessions. They were pretty powerful. Based on this, Sophie and I took the roadshow around. We went to Milan, Barcelona, Vienna, Regent's Park, doing all these different workshops, which are all based around medical error and ways to try and avoid them as well. One of the other things I should probably tell you at this stage was actually being the care group lead meant I could hire people. So that's when we started hiring things like clinical teaching fellows, and that's when I hired Sophie as well, and who's then since then taken over a lot of the peds teaching here. In 2015, I'd been the clinical director as well, and I took over a different role, which is Director of Medical Education, which is a role for the Trust. So the Trust is the hospital, by the way, in case trust sounds a strange word, the hospital. And here I was looking after 550 different trainees right across the hospital. And I was becoming slightly more detached from the kind of day-to-day working with individual trainees and students and things like that, more into kind of policy, team building, helping other people, collecting data. Also, I think I probably thought at that stage you needed a suit and tie for everything, so that's what that one's doing there. I thought it can't be that difficult because I kind of worked out how to do it in paediatrics, and I remember telling Jane at the time, you know, how hard can it really be? There's only really 4 things you have to get right. You know, give them decent clinical experience. You have to mentor them properly. They need some decent facilities, and they need some departmental teaching. Can't be that hard, can it? Well, it was, wasn't it? So, I mean, quite quickly we lost some trainees that were taken away because of actually some other things I hadn't really appreciated. Behaviours, you know, some appalling behaviours in various different departments. We actually had to go in and work with those. and Richard will probably be a journey with me on this particular one, trying to help departments actually realise that you can't be really offensive to your trainees and actually expect them to learn properly. Fortunately, at that time, actually, we had some new leadership within the trust, Richard part of them, and Jacqueline and Gillian as well, really got the idea that actually we could use educational approaches to make a real difference, not just to the quality, but also even the bottom line, the actual finances of the trust. And we could actually change around the priorities there as well. Now, in this regard, this is, I think, probably the busiest slide I think any of you will ever have seen in a PowerPoint presentation. This is 1 year's General Medical Council National Training Survey. Basically, the GMC send out every year a questionnaire to all of the trainees and they fill it in. From that, they work out how good you are as a trust, as a department, in a number of different domains. There's 18 different domains. And then based on how you relate to the national average, you get green, that's very good, light green, fairly good, white, very nondescript, etc., all the way down to red, okay? And the problem was, being Director of Medical Education, no one paid any attention to you at all, unless you were somewhere down here when they paid a lot of attention to you. But this at least meant that we could actually do something with these departments that are actually having trouble at the bottom. This was an intervention here in one department. As you can see, things are gradually kind of falling off a cliff. In 2016, things went badly wrong, and then 2017 we did something, things improved, and then kind of settled down. This is just one department. We had 4 or 5. We actually had this sort of intervention in to try and make a difference. It was great fun actually doing that. Amazing team that I work with as well. Working on this actually gave me an idea that really all I wanted was some reds. So I wrote this article called Bring on the Reds. And this is a sort of semi, I don't know, it's an article. And for some reason, it's got picked up by the General Medical Council, and they put it on their own website. This is probably the last place I'd expect to see this particular article, because it wasn't necessarily complimentary on the GMC survey. But there we go, that's me on the General Medical Council. It's the closest I hope I'll ever get to that particularly regulatory body. It also occurred to me that actually this was a very interesting area of a massive data set that actually no one was looking at all. So armed with some people from Health Education England, I'm a school fellow, we actually tried to look at this. Does it really make an impact? Yes, it does, but only if you're red. And with this amazing group of students and junior doctors, some of whom are here tonight, some of whom are online as well, we started actually systematically looking at all those different domains and trying to work out if they made a difference. Here's some data, it's just in the press at the moment actually, but what we've done is compared mortality on a trust by trust basis with all those different domains in the GMC survey, and found that actually supervision was one of the areas that related most closely to the mortality in your hospital. The better your supervision was rated by the trainee, the lower your mortality. Perhaps you wouldn't necessarily not expect that. But what about workload? Doesn't seem to make any difference at all. So I don't know what that means, but doesn't necessarily mean double the workload, your mortality will stay the same. But it's very, very interesting that you could do that with that data set. I can't really go any further without properly referencing this amazing group. We put this group together with Jack Barton, a student from here. We were working together. He grew a group of students from across London, and we put a lot of stuff out in the last couple of years on lots of different areas particularly around medical education. In 2019, I moved on from the Director of Medical Education role to be the Head of School for Pediatrics. And this is a role I've been kind of working with for some time. But just to give you a bit of background, London School of Pediatrics, 1,200 trainees, pan-London, 32 different sites, okay. They trained for 8 years, so we're looking after them from all of that time. And this is a really amazing job. I'm really thoroughly enjoying it, but it's trying to put these very big educational principles into practice in all of these different educational sites, and not at all easy as a result. I've had some fairly illustrious forebears here. The first head of school was Hilary Cass, who's gone on to be the president of the Royal College of Pediatrics. The next president was Andrew Long, who's with me tonight, and who actually hired me in this role. And then Camilla Kingdom, who's, I think, watching from Rwanda. Hello, Camilla, who's also now the current president of the Royal College. By the way, darling, I'm not going anywhere near the president role. That looks a very, very difficult one. It's absolutely amazing working with an incredibly clever, hardworking, smart group of people. Here's a few of them. Oh no, hang on. They're coming in. I forgot the order of slides. I've got to tell you something else first, which is actually by this stage, things are beginning to take off. As you can see from my name badges, by the time we get to 2019, I'm looking pretty tired. I was really very stretched by this stage. I've basically been working, I think, harder and harder and kind of trying to balance that with various other activities, particularly cycling, and taking on sort of more and more ambitious targets. And it kind of came rather to a head in 2019, where I had a very spectacular bike crash that I'm very, very fortunate, I think, to walk away from. Well, I didn't walk away from it, crawled away from it, but I've fully recovered since. And you know, as often happens when you actually go through something very difficult, you come out of it, but actually you take scars with you. And I've certainly taken a lot of wisdom from that. And so since then, I've done things really quite differently. That's why I was trying to come to this slide, because actually I realised I can't do everything on my own. And actually doing things with an amazing group of people who are very clever, very motivated, very dedicated, actually hardworking. What they really need is some direction. They need some support. Occasionally they need blockages taking out of the way. I've also got some great support in my postgraduate deans, Gary and Geeta, I think, who are also online, and also my deputies, Ruth and Anne, who have just made this job so much easier and so much more fun and so much easier to do as well. And actually working with groups like this is how you make a doctor. You actually have to put people in these large groups and help them to move through. You have to work with these very large teams in order to make it all happen. Just two things that really came out of that I'd like to highlight. There's hundreds I could, but I just brought out two that perhaps have had slightly wider impact. The first one is this thing called FOAM, Free Open Access Medical Education. And with Katie Knight, we set up this FOAM site, which basically is a series of articles, medical articles for paediatricians. And it's just-in-time medicine. It's the sort of stuff you can read on your phone, on the bus, just before you see a patient or when you're trying to work out what to do. I wrote a large number of the articles that set the thing up initially. It's got 10,000 followers now on Twitter. You can find it at Pediatric FOAMed. The other one that I just wanted to highlight amongst many is our MRCPCH video site. If you need to learn how to examine a child such that you might pass the membership exam, this would be a good place to start, because there's a massive bank of videos of how to do this. And I put this together with a group, including Nick over there, and Chris Kelly and others to do this. This has been spectacularly successful, around sort of 8 or 9 million views of this now, and a major resource for lots of people throughout the world. So, how to make a doctor. The title of this talk is as much, I think, a story of how I became who I am professionally, as opposed to a sort of simple recipe for making doctors. But it's unfair to bring everyone here and not actually to address the problem or the question directly. Firstly, it's no use actually just training a doctor. The country needs about 14,000 of them each year. Yes, they need information, they need skills training, and they need to know how to put this into practice. And all of this can be done at medical school. Then, as they learn more, these new doctors have to put their understanding into practice as they take on more and more complex and high-risk tasks. This has to happen somewhere where their actions won't harm the very patients they're both treating and learning from at the same time. All this requires a dedicated teams of supervisors to make this happen at scale. And that's how you take bright, enthusiastic, but completely inexperienced students and make them into the sort of person that you would literally trust with the life of your child. Thank you.
was, Professor. So the question is, when you have to give the vote of thanks, is to discuss what the role of that person and how they've developed over a period of time. Like Jenny,
you need to spend like them to the
and like Jenny, I also very much like inaugurals because don't go away. Then what they do is they show you the development of the person from starting to think about a particular question, then thinking about how you should take that on in your career, developing that, and then developing so that rather than doing it with one or two people, and thinking about how you take that through to the department, then to the hospital, then to the director, and then the plain principles apply, but you bring it back again and again. And that is, in many ways, not only how to make a doctor, it's how to make a professor. So when you sit down and try to think what makes a professor, what makes that person different, there are two principles. The first, which is instantly available when you go to the promotions committee, is they all sit round and say, well, is this person really a fundamentally, thoroughly nice person? In which case, they promote him. But if that was all there was to it, and Jonathan is indeed a thoroughly nice person, as we all know, then that would be fine. But unfortunately, that doesn't always get you through the bar. And then you have to have something else extra to that. And what you have to have is kind of three things. And your talk today sort of exemplified those, I think, so well. The first thing is you have to think. And what kept coming back to is that you thought about this, and then you thought about the problem, and you rethought about, and you need to be able to sort of think your way through all of those at that moment. And that is very beautifully described in what you need to do. And the sort of second thing is obviously clearly is you have to have a lot of teams, and you have to build your team, build all your and also describe that as well. And I think the last, which is clearly came over so well, Jonathan, is you have to have passion, and you've got to be passionate about what you're doing, and you also did that very beautifully as well. So just to say thank you from the university. We look forward to working with you again. I've already been talking about what we think you should do next, which is so exciting, and we want to say thank you very much indeed, and we look forward to working with the university for many years as well for the future. Bye-bye. And the last task is to say that actually refreshments are provided literally through that door and round the corner, which is ready now.
Fantastic. Let's go there.
Let's go. Okay. Well done.
Thank you very much. That's a very nice day.
Very good. Very beautiful.
Talk about picture perfect.
Oh, no. Thank you so much, Jenny.
Brilliant. It was brilliant.
Very good.
You all people will adore.
Yes.
Totally everyone.
Thank you. They'll tell you all about it.